case of Alan Wade. High school sweethearts James Reggie Sooner and Carol Alford hailed from Charleston, South Carolina. They grew up together, same school, same grade, knowing each other since childhood. Over time, their friendship evolved into something deeper. By 1959, at 15 years old, they were dating. Friends often remarked on how harmonious and beautiful James and Carol seemed together. They captured these moments in photos. Young and happy, with dreams of a long and joyful life ahead. It was their first deep connection. The pair became almost inseparable, both in school and out. They seriously thought about marriage once they turned 18, a decision supported by their parents. But life had other plans. In 1962, just after graduating high school, James was drafted into military service. He and Carol decided to delay their wedding until his return and promised to exchange letters regularly. Time moved on, and the separation became lengthy. By the mid-60s, James found himself deployed to Vietnam, a hot spot, and all contact was lost thereafter. Carol had no word if her beloved was even alive. She faced significant challenges in her life, starting when he stopped writing to her. She chose to further her education while simultaneously securing employment at the Charleston Air Force Base. Eventually, Carol married, but this first marriage ended quickly without any children. In 1975, she entered into a second marriage with Richard Alford, and in 1977, they had a daughter named Rhonda. Unfortunately, the second marriage also proved unsuccessful due to Richard's excessive drinking and physical abuse. By the mid-1980s, Carol could no longer endure the ongoing abuse. She took her daughter and filed for divorce. However, Richard continued to harass and pursue her relentlessly. In 1987, his behavior reached a critical point. Richard purchased a handgun, consumed a large amount of alcohol, and went to confront Carol. On that fateful day, Richard rang Carol's doorbell. She unsuspectingly opened the door while Rhonda was in the room behind her. Despite his daughter's presence, Richard drew his gun and shot Carol multiple times in front of Rhonda. He then left the scene, drove to a deserted area, and committed suicide by shooting himself. Carol was fortunate to survive due to neighbors hearing the gunshots and Rhonda's desperate cries for help. They promptly called for an ambulance and alerted the police. Carol was in critical condition after losing significant blood. She underwent numerous complex surgeries and blood transfusions over several days before beginning her recovery. Although she gradually regained strength, she became permanently blind in her right eye and disabled for life. Toward the late 1990s, Carol's health deteriorated seriously once more. She experienced severe weight loss along with persistent pain and weakness, which prompted a thorough medical examination at the hospital. Despite enduring these substantial physical and emotional hardships throughout her life, Carol's resilience shone through as she navigated each challenge thrown her way. In 1987, Carol received a distressing diagnosis of liver cancer. During her treatment, she was inadvertently infected with the hepatitis C virus, which went undetected and untreated. The virus silently damaged her liver over the years, ultimately leading to cancer. However, due to appropriate treatment and supportive therapy, Carol's condition was stabilized. She was required to take her prescribed medications daily for the rest of her life and undergo regular medical checkups to make necessary adjustments to her treatment plan. Carol faced additional challenges after losing her job at the Air Force Base due to severe gunshot wounds. With the added burden of cancer, she was no longer able to perform physically demanding tasks or remain on her feet for extended periods. Consequently, she took a position as a call center operator for a cable TV company in Charleston, her hometown. On the other hand, James experienced his own set of hardships in Vietnam. He was severely wounded during the war and almost lost his leg, requiring a prolonged hospital stay. His name was mistakenly included in lists of the deceased, leading even his relatives to believe he had died. Fortunately, he survived and eventually returned home years later. By that time, he had lost contact with Carol. She had moved residences, married, and believed that James had perished in the conflict. Although James later married, severe injuries from the war led to diabetes and several chronic conditions, which prevented him from becoming a father. His marriage ended after a few years, leaving him living alone since then. He found employment as a laborer on the local railroad, but expected no further pleasant surprises from life. In fall 2000, while Carol was performing her duties at the call center, answering phones and providing customer advice, she encountered another caller whose voice sounded unnervingly familiar. This voice elicited an emotional response within her that she could not ignore. Carol immediately recognized her first high school love, but she was hesitant to act on it because she believed James was dead. She answered all the customers' questions and then suddenly turned to him, saying his full name. Silence hung in the air for a moment. The man timidly asked how she knew his name. Carol began to cry and responded that she was the girl he had dated in high school, the girl he once wanted to marry. For the next few moments, they both cried into the phone, unable to find words. They soon discovered that they still lived in their hometown and agreed to meet the next evening. Meeting again after 38 years, according to Rhonda's recollection, her mother came home from work that day looking excited like a schoolgirl and talking nonstop about James. The next day, Carol prepared diligently for the date, trying on dresses, doing her hair and makeup. She realized that she was no longer the young beauty James remembered, but wanted to look her best and win back his heart. Their reunion was exciting. They hadn't seen each other in 38 years. They talked endlessly about everything, the highlights and sorrows of their lives, failed marriages, work issues, and health problems. They reminisced about their happy times together. Their old feelings reignited, and James and Carol were eager to make up for lost time. They began seeing each other daily and decided just a couple of weeks later to live together. 5 months later, they married, and Carol moved into her new husband's home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. Family life brought its own set of joys and challenges. The couple first resided in their native Charleston, South Carolina. In love and happy, they engaged in everyday life activities and took care of each other, especially since both were aging with health concerns. Next door lived the Cole family, longtime acquaintances of James. Stephen Cole had also served in Vietnam, where he was severely wounded and now used a wheelchair. His wife Natalie seemed often absent due to work commitments and preferred socializing with friends over spending time at home. Their daughter Tiffany would typically hang around on the street with nothing to do and no money for even small pocket expenses. When James and Carol first started living together, Tiffany was still in high school. Good-natured Carol immediately felt a connection with the neighbor girl. She genuinely felt sorry for Tiffany, who seemed unwanted by her own mother. Over 5 years, Carol did everything possible to support Tiffany. Carol invited her to family lunches and dinners, where delicious food was served, periodically bought clothes for the girl, and even provided small amounts of money for minor expenses. Carol treated Tiffany like she was her own daughter, surrounding her with care and attention. In February 2004, the Sumners decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumina minivan. Tiffany expressed interest in buying it through installments, since she had no money but needed the car desperately. The couple decided to sell it to her at a very low price and divided the payment into manageable amounts stretched over a whole year. Early in February 2005, the Sumners decided to relocate to Florida due to health issues that had significantly worsened for both spouses. Doctors advised them to move south near the ocean for better health conditions. By then, both were retired, so they chose to make this significant life change. Carol and James sold their spacious home in Charleston and bought property in Jacksonville, the largest city in Florida, where they also purchased a new Lincoln Town car. The couple was extremely happy and settled into their new place while making plans for their future life together. Every day, Carol called her adult daughter Rhonda. She shared everything about what was going on in her life, including her thoughts and plans. So when communication ceased, Rhonda was both surprised and deeply concerned. In June 2005, Rhonda became concerned when her mother failed to call her as usual and didn't answer her calls either. Initially, she pushed away negative thoughts and hoped everything was fine with her mom and stepdad. She thought they might get in touch soon. However, the following day brought no change. Rhonda called both her mother's and James's cell phones every half hour, but they were now unreachable and voicemail messages went unanswered. On the third day, Rhonda decided it was time to take action. She chose to drive to another state to personally check if her mother and stepfather were all right. She started early in the morning for a 5-hour drive to reach the Sumners' home. Upon arrival, the first thing she noticed was that their car was missing, which seemed unusual. Approaching the front door, she found it slightly open. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, despite a light being on in one of the rooms while sunlight streamed outside. Rhonda called out loudly for her mother and James, but heard nothing in response. Entering the kitchen next, she saw a table set for two with food that appeared untouched for at least 3 days. It looked like they were about to have dinner but abruptly left it unfinished. The house itself was in disarray. Things were scattered around randomly, and some doors and cupboards were open, as if someone had frantically searched through them. Rhonda's concern grew when she spotted crucial medications on a bedside table in their bedroom. Her mother's cancer pills, taken 3 times daily, and James's insulin, administered hourly, remained there untouched along with completely dead phones. Given these observations, medications left behind, and no cell phone usage, it became clear that her mother and stepfather couldn't have gone far or been away for long without these essentials. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Rhonda immediately contacted the police to report their disappearance under what seemed like strange circumstances. The couple's vehicle was promptly included on the wanted list. All bank cards belonging to Carol and James were blocked the same day. The initial days of the search yielded no significant results. It was impossible to locate either the Sumners themselves or any witnesses. However, on June 12th, several events transpired simultaneously, enabling the police to pick up the trail of the criminals. Firstly, a man phoned one of the banks, identified himself as Mr. James Sooner, and complained about his card being blocked, making it impossible for him to withdraw cash. Upon verifying the card information, the bank employee immediately suspected something amiss. The employee suggested that Mr. Sooner personally visit the nearest bank branch to resolve the issue, but the man abruptly hung up. A few minutes later, from the same number, yet directed at another bank, a woman identifying herself as Mrs. Carol Sooner called and reported a similar problem with her card being blocked. When she was asked to visit the bank in person, she categorically refused, citing health reasons and emphasizing her immediate need for access to her funds. Naturally, this request was denied. The information regarding these calls and recordings of them was immediately handed over to law enforcement. The same day at the station, these recordings were played for Rhonda, who confidently stated that neither voice belonged to her mother nor stepfather. This was evident from the outset, as both individuals were in their 60s, while the voices sounded much younger. Police promptly hypothesized that these imposters were directly connected to the disappearance of the Sumners. They suspected that either these individuals had kidnapped Carol and James and were holding them somewhere against their will, or had possibly killed them after coercing information about their bank accounts and cards. A few days later, the missing couple's car was discovered, abandoned on a deserted road in a wooded area. There were no traces of blood or signs of struggle in the cabin. Experts found hair and sweat marks in the trunk, which belonged to both spouses. It became evident that the owners had been taken away in the trunk of their own car, and prospects of finding them alive were grim. Upon examining the couple's bank transactions, it was revealed that money had been withdrawn from their cards several times after they ceased contacting their daughter. Reviewing the ATM surveillance footage showed that a young man, who couldn't be identified immediately, made the withdrawals. Additionally, a request was made to trace all calls from the number used by the imposters to contact the bank. The SIM card itself was purchased with prepaid time shortly before the disappearance of the couple. Attempts to establish the buyer's identity failed. However, it was discovered that on June 6th, a call was made from this number to a car rental company. It turned out that a guest at one of the hotels rented a Mazda RX-8 under the name Tiffany Cole. This same car was subsequently driven by an unidentified young man who withdrew money from ATMs using cards belonging to the missing individuals. He withdrew $1,000 from one card and nearly $3,000 from another. Thanks to built-in location trackers in rental cars, investigators determined that this Mazda RX-8 had parked at a hotel in Charleston. A CAPTCHA team was promptly dispatched and forcefully entered the room where these individuals were staying. Note, CAPTCHA is likely a mistake. Perhaps you meant SWAT or a similar tactical unit. The room was strewn with packages and receipts from various stores, including clothes, gadgets, video games, cosmetics, perfumes, and expensive alcohol. Inside were 3 individuals: 23-year-old Tiffany Cole, her 24-year-old boyfriend Michael Jackson, and 19-year-old Alan Lindell Wade. The young men appeared surprised and confused as police placed handcuffs on their wrists. All 3 individuals were taken to the police station and placed in separate rooms for questioning. Initially, they pretended not to understand the accusations against them or simply remained silent. A search of their room uncovered several items belonging to the Sumners, including their bank cards, a laptop, some of Carol's jewelry, James's expensive coin collection, keys to their Lincoln Town car, and pawnshop receipts in the name of Cole. It was discovered that part of the stolen jewelry had been pawned by Tiffany and the money spent with friends. After several hours of interrogation, and upon being presented with irrefutable evidence found in the hotel room, Tiffany was the first to speak. She sobbed as she revealed that she and her friends had robbed the elderly couple, but insisted they did nothing further to them. They then fled and started spending other people's money. Tiffany also admitted that there was another accomplice, a 19-year-old named Bruce Kent Nixon, who was paid $300 for his help. They never saw him again after that. Indeed, Bruce had agreed to participate in the crime for a promised payment. Afterward, he spent all the money on illegal substances. Finding him wasn't difficult, as he lived in Charleston and had not attempted to flee or hide. He was arrested at his parents' house. A careless phrase led Bruce to realize how serious the consequences could be for his involvement. Consequently, he agreed to cooperate with the authorities to avoid facing the death penalty. What he revealed was horrifying. It all started in May 2005, when Tiffany went to deliver a payment for a car bought 6 months prior from the Sumners. She often visited them personally because hospitable Carol and James invited her to stay for a night or a few days, offered delicious food, and even gave gifts if she brought friends along. There was always space for guests in the house and at their table. This time, Tiffany showed up with her new boyfriend and was warmly invited to dinner. Since it was late, the couple ended up staying overnight at the Sumners' home. During the meal, the Sumners discussed how they had settled into their new place. Carol inadvertently mentioned that they had nearly $100,000 left after selling their house in Charleston, implying they could comfortably enjoy their retirement without any financial worries. With this revelation, Carol unwittingly sealed her and her husband's fate. Tiffany and Michael exchanged looks. That night, while still at the couple's house, they began plotting how to obtain that substantial amount of money. In the morning, Tiffany and Michael bid farewell and returned to South Carolina. Over the next 2 weeks, they found accomplices, assigned roles and responsibilities, and began executing their plan. On June 6th, Tiffany rented an inconspicuous car while Bruce and Alan stole 4 shovels from an unspecified location. Together, they drove to a secluded spot in the suburbs of Jacksonville and started digging a deep hole intended as the grave for the Sumners couple. On July 8th, Tiffany purchased rope and duct tape from a hardware store and handed these materials over to her accomplices. That evening, Bruce and Alan arrived at the prospective victim's home under the pretense of needing assistance and asked if they could make a phone call from inside. Despite finding them strange, Carol decided to let them in, thinking they genuinely needed help. Once inside, Bruce and Alan immediately attacked Carol and her husband when he responded to her screams. They bound the couple's hands and feet with duct tape, blindfolded them, and demanded information about any money or valuables in the house. Under severe threats of torture and death, the Sumners provided details of their bank accounts and PIN codes for their cards in hopes of being spared. However, once this information was obtained by the intruders, 2 additional accomplices entered the house. They helped drag Carol and her husband into their backyard before stuffing them into the trunk of their family car. Alan drove their Lincoln with Bruce seated beside him, while Tiffany and Michael followed close behind in a rented Mazda RX-8 as part of their sinister plan. While on their way, they encountered a police patrol that might have tried to stop the car with the couple in the trunk. The second car was supposed to divert attention by speeding up or blatantly breaking rules. However, No one appeared in their path, so both cars reached the destination safely. In the trunk, James managed to free his arm. He removed the bandage and duct tape from his face, and also from his wife's face to prevent suffocation. There wasn't much more they could do. Their surprise, bewilderment, and shock were immense when the trunk lid opened. And among their captors were Tiffany and her boyfriend, who had recently visited them. The captives were led several dozen meters through the woods to a prepared grave. They were then simply pushed into it. The couple pleaded desperately for their lives, but the young criminals proceeded otherwise. They killed the couple in a brutal manner by burying them alive. According to Bruce, it took about an hour for them to cover the bound elderly people with earth, while they cried, confessed their love for each other, and said goodbye. An examination later showed that the spouses died of suffocation. Pieces of soil in which they were buried were found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and even stomachs. After completing this gruesome act, the outlaws abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They went to the Sumner's house where they took valuable items, and then returned to South Carolina to start spending their loot. However, after 2 days, all stolen cards were blocked. For days later, all participants in the crime were taken into custody. Bruce Nixon was the only one who fully admitted his guilt from the beginning and agreed to cooperate with investigators, hoping for leniency. He revealed where the spouses were buried and detailed everything that happened on that awful night. Tiffany claimed that her boyfriend, Michael, had lost his mind and initiated the crime. When he heard about the substantial amount of money retained by the Sumners after the sale of the house, her lawyer argued that the girl was an accomplice and not directly involved in the murder herself. Jackson and Lindell opted to stay silent, but the collected evidence was compelling. The jury didn't think Tiffany Cole's innocence was credible, since she participated in creating the criminal plan, rented a car, and devised a diversionary tactic if they were chased by police. She even helped dig a grave for the spouses. Furthermore, she pawned stolen items and joyfully spent money, as evidenced by numerous photos of her in purchased clothes and in a limousine rented to celebrate their illicit success. As a result, Bruce Nixon was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Jackson, Tiffany, and Lindell received the death penalty. Despite filing multiple appeals and grievances, all were denied, leaving the sentence unchanged. However, in 2023, 18 years after their heinous crime, that very same death sentence had yet to be carried out. 51-year-old Lisa Lindstone lived in Dallas, Texas, in 2010. She was a Mesquite High School graduate. From 1991 to 2005, she worked in the advertising department of the Dallas Morning News. Lisa was having financial problems and suffered from depression and anxiety. She lived in an apartment with her girlfriend of 15 years, Sherry Henry. They had 2 dogs and 26 cats. Lisa was an animal lover and kept rescuing them off the streets. Lisa was last seen by a neighbor on June 4, 2010. That same neighbor reported her missing on June 20th, after Lisa had missed a dinner meeting and did not pick up a friend from the airport as she had promised. Police officers went to the apartment where Lisa and Sherry lived. Sherry told them that nothing was wrong and that it was not unusual for Lisa to drop out of sight. The police could not find any evidence that Lisa was in danger or that a crime had occurred, so they closed the case. Lisa's friends, on the other hand, believed that something was very wrong and kept calling Lisa's home, but Sherry told them that Lisa was not available. On June 29th, one of Lisa's friends again asked the police to check on her welfare, as she had still not been seen. When investigators checked again at her apartment, they found a couple of stray dogs and 26 cats living in awful conditions. They were flea-infested and covered with feces. Animal control officials seized all of the animals. Lisa's friends said that since Lisa was such an animal lover, she would not have allowed this to happen. On July 2nd, almost 4 weeks since Lisa was last seen, a friend of hers noticed Sherry driving Lisa's Cadillac to a dumpster behind a nearby store. Sherry then emptied a few trash bags into the dumpster. After Sherry left, Lisa's friend checked inside the dumpster. Inside was a lot of Lisa's belongings, family photos, and heirlooms. Lisa's friends went to the police with this news. Investigators then obtained a warrant to search Lisa and Sherry's apartment. What they found has not been made public yet. Investigators never named Sherry a suspect, but they said she was not interested at all in finding Lisa. Lisa is described as a Caucasian female with brown hair, which she dyes blonde, brown eyes, is 5 feet 7 inches in height, and weighs 125 pounds. If you have any information regarding this case, feel free to call the Dallas Police Department at this number. Vera Holland was born on April 8, 1949, in London, England. In 1967, Vera married Edward Bennett. They had 2 children together. The marriage ended in divorce. In 1978, she married Richard Stevens, and they had a child together. But again, this marriage also ended in divorce. In 1991, she married Brian Holland. They lived on St. Barnabas Road in Reading, England. On the evening of November 14, 1996, 47-year-old Vera left her home to get dinner from a KFC restaurant. It was about a 6-minute walk from her home to the KFC and back. She left her home at 10 minutes past 6, and it was already dark outside. Vera failed to make it back home, and her husband Brian called the police at 10:45 p.m. Investigators looked at CCTV footage taken outside the KFC, but they saw no sign of her, so it is now believed that she never made it to the restaurant. She had been wearing a pink coat, green skirt, black jumper, and black shoes. 2 days after Vera was last seen, fire services were called, as there was a fire on the side of a road about 4 miles away from Vera's home. When the fire had been extinguished, a woman's body was found inside a carpet. She was quickly identified as 47-year-old Vera Holland. An autopsy revealed that she had been strangled. No DNA from the attacker was found at the crime scene. 80 police officers from Thames Valley Police were involved in the investigation. Close to 2,000 people were interviewed, and 800 statements were taken. There were also over 100,000 pamphlets sent out to local people asking for any information regarding the case. Investigators canvassed the area Vera would have had to walk through to get to the KFC, but no evidence was found. A female police officer, dressed in clothing like Vera's on the night she disappeared, reenacted the walk she would have made, hoping it would jog someone's memory. Some witnesses came forward with reports of suspicious cars or people they saw in the area, but none of these leads ever led anywhere. Investigators also tried to get more information about the carpet, hoping it would lead them to the attacker, but it did not. The carpet was a section of bedroom-quality carpet and was beige. It had 2 furniture-sized indentations and 2 radiator pipe holes on opposite sides. Soil and weeds had started to grow out of the carpet, so it was believed that the carpet had been stored outside for quite a while. Investigators also believed that Vera's body had been left inside the carpet for more than a day before she was found. On December 17, 1996, about 4 weeks after Vera's life was taken, her second husband Richard and his wife were arrested in connection to the case. They were held for a few hours and then released again. In January 1997, Vera's husband Brian was arrested, but also let go after a few hours. It is not known why anyone was arrested. On June 20, 1997, Vera Holland's funeral was held at Caversham Crematorium in Reading. There have not really been any more developments in the case. In November 2016, Vera's children made an appeal to investigators to look for answers. In January 2017, investigators announced that new witnesses had come forward, and they are still trying to get this cold case solved. But that is all we know at this point. 20-year-old Darlene Crashik was an active-duty soldier stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado Springs, Colorado, in 1987. On March 16th, she went out with members of her unit to a local club named Shuffles. She was last seen leaving the club between midnight and 1 in the morning. On March 17th, her body was found behind a Korean club restaurant. She had been strangled. Investigators were able to collect DNA from the crime scene that belonged to an unknown man. The DNA was found on a wire hanger that had been used to strangle Darlene. In 2016, investigators submitted the evidence they had to the United States Army Criminal Investigation Lab for additional DNA testing. They were able to narrow down predictive traits for the suspect, including eye color, hair color, skin color, and face shape. 2 composite sketches were made showing what the suspect may have looked like at 25 years old and at 55 years old. In 2019, investigators made use of genetic genealogy. They submitted the DNA they had to ancestry sites such as 23andMe and Ancestry.com. Forensic scientists found people in Wisconsin and Texas who had similar DNA to the samples found at the crime scene. Eventually, they believed that 58-year-old Michael White had taken Darlene's life. They found that back in 1987, he lived just a few miles from the crime scene and was also a soldier at Fort Carson. Photos of Michael also matched the composite sketch. Investigators had to make sure that he was indeed the man they were looking for before they arrested him. They followed him from his house to his work. They then watched him drink from a fast food cup. Investigators obtained the cup, and after further DNA testing, it was confirmed that his DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene. It was announced in June of 2019 by investigators that he had been arrested. In 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison without a chance of parole. 8-year-old Joshua Randall Harmon and his family lived in Roswell in 1988. He was described as an amazing young boy who had an uncanny relationship with nature and with God. Joshua was a student at Gimpo Bridge Elementary School in Alpharetta, Georgia, and loved ice cream and playing outside with his friends. On May 15th, Joshua was reported missing by his parents when he did not make it home for dinner. One article said that he ran outside because there was an ice cream vendor outside the apartment complex, and another article said that he had been playing outside with his friends and never made it back home for dinner. A neighbor came forward and said that Joshua stopped by their home around 7 p.m. that night to see if their son wanted to come outside and play. The neighbor said no, as they were about to eat dinner. Joshua then told the neighbor that he would wait in the woods behind the apartment complex for his friend to come play with him. This was the last sighting of Joshua alive. For the next 48 hours, extensive searches were conducted for Joshua. Sadly, his body was discovered in the woods nearby. Investigators determined that he had been strangled. It appeared as if he had also been assaulted. The crime deeply shocked the community. Over 250 people attended the funeral. Roswell investigators, alongside the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, investigated the case extensively and collected evidence. But the case went cold. At the start of 2021, Joshua's body was exhumed in hopes of identifying more evidence. Investigators worked with an independent lab called Cybergenetics Incorporated. They were able to collect DNA belonging to an unknown man from Joshua's body. In July 2021, they identified 56-year-old James Michael Coates as the person who took Joshua's life. He lived in Woodstock, Georgia, but back in 1988, he lived in the same apartment complex as Joshua. On July 21, 2021, James was arrested during a traffic stop while in the back of an Uber. He is currently in a Fulton County jail. On July 22nd, investigators held a press conference to announce that an arrest had been made. Joshua's aunt, Marlene Carlisle, said that Joshua's mom, Sherry, passed away in October 2020. Sherry never gave up while she was still alive and made sure that investigators kept working the case. Investigators said that James had spent about 20 years in prison for an unrelated crime, but did not specify what he did. William and Ina Campbell lived in a house on Jackson Road in Clarksville, Tennessee, in 2010. They were both in their 80s and enjoying a peaceful life. On January 29th, the Campbells' neighbor, Daniel Champagne, tried calling them a few times. Daniel was like a son to them and said that they were his second mom and dad. He also had a key to their house, so when they did not answer any of his calls, he went inside. He found the house had been ransacked. The kitchen cabinets were all open. Daniel also made a gruesome discovery. He found William and Ina in their bedrooms, each with a gunshot wound to the head. They had medical issues and slept in separate bedrooms. Ina still had her oxygen tube inside her nose when he found her. It was determined that their lives were taken while they were sleeping. Neighbors told investigators that this was strange, as their dogs would have barked if a stranger had come in and woken the Campbells up. This led investigators to believe that the person responsible knew the dogs and the couple. Their adopted son, William Roger Campbell, then became a person of interest. It was speculated that he would gain financially from the crime. No evidence that he took his parents' lives could be found, however, and the case went cold. William Roger Campbell was arrested at his home in connection with the case and taken to Clarksville. He is now in a Montgomery County jail. Investigators have not given a reason why he was arrested, but you have to believe that his appearance does not help his case. Detective Keenan Carlton had this to say: "These were innocent victims. These were people who were beloved by their community. They lived in their neighborhood for a number of years. Their neighbors loved them and are all happy to see some resolution." Keenan gave credit to detectives who worked the case a decade ago for laying the groundwork in the investigation, and said that a recent review of the case allowed detectives to put a final piece of the puzzle together and arrest Campbell. The case of Ricky Neve. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Ricky Neve on the day of his tragic death matched with James Watson, who was a teenager at the time and had managed to evade justice for so long. Despite his mother's harsh way of raising her children, she seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her actions, driving her to seek justice for her son's murder. Ricky's sisters were also determined to unravel the mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what truly happened in the household where Ricky and his sisters were raised, and what events occurred on the day of Ricky's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? Ricky Lee Harvey, also known as Ricky Neve, was born on March 4, 1988 in the city of Peterborough, located in the county of Cambridgeshire in England, to Trevor Harvey and Ruth and Greg. Ruth's life had been marked by turmoil from an early age, with her being placed in foster care at the mere age of 2. Her younger brother, who was born blind, had already been placed in foster care at the tender age of 1. She endured a challenging journey through various foster homes before returning to her parents' care, forever changed by the abuse and insults she suffered while she was under foster care. Her empathy and affection dwindled with time, which was an observation made and reported by her mother to the authorities, a struggle that the mother had been dealing with too for quite some time. Tragedy struck again when Ruth's parents took their own lives as a suicide pact, leaving her to face the world alone once again. At 16, she met Trevor Harvey, settled in Cambridgeshire, and gave birth to their first child, Rebecca Maria Harvey, in 1986. They had their second child, Ricky, 2 years later. Their happiness was short-lived, as Trevor and Ruth separated when Ricky was only 3. But Ruth met Dean Neve not long after. They married and welcomed their first daughter into the world and named her Michelle Neve. The family later moved into the Welland estate in Peterborough in 1992. Ruth decided to change Ricky's surname to match her new husband's, and he was now known as Ricky Neve. Sometime later, they welcomed another daughter and named her Sheridan Neve. They lived in Red Mile Walk, which was a part of the Welland estate that was well known for its association with crime and drug use. Unfortunately, the family's new home was riddled with challenges, as Dean Neve was a notorious drug dealer, and Ruth had succumbed to addiction. She would even spend a lot on drugs, to the point of neglecting her children's basic needs. Ricky and his sisters often wandered the estate without proper care, food, or clothing, drawing concern from neighbors who bravely reported the situation to social services. Ricky was the one who took care of his siblings when they were starved, as he would nick something from the shops and bring it to feed his siblings. He loved being clean, so he also made sure they were clean by running a bath for them. Dean was rarely at home, and Ruth often blamed Ricky for this, claiming that he was always away since he hated his stepson. This made her start hating Ricky, as she would write to Dean during his prison stints about how she had hurt him by punching him and burning him with matches, and how she even wanted to kill him. She hated him more as she claimed that he would always laugh at her. The neighbors, often seeing the children outside, had no idea what really happened in that house. Ruth tormented and degraded the innocent children, frequently burning them with cigarettes and hurling insults at them. At one point, She even wrote "idiot" on their foreheads and forbade them from removing it. She would force them to stand for long periods of time while she smacked them on the head. She sent them to buy her drugs even after starving them. An allegation surfaced that she had been seen dangling Ricky by his ankles over a bridge. On one occasion, she forced Ricky to swallow liquid soap, and as he struggled to breathe, he managed to say, "I love you, Mommy." She would strangle the daughters to unconsciousness and even beat them with a hairbrush to the point of breaking it. They were even locked naked in rooms full of urine. The children tried to get the attention of their neighbors, which was often in vain, as their cries were not heard by them. Ricky was placed on the at-risk register after Ruth warned Child Services repeatedly that she would kill him. He was taken into short-term care to give the mother some time. However, his files were mismanaged. Ruth, despite the clear evidence of the burns, cuts, and bruises on the children, would get away with it through her false explanations and excuses of accidents, even blaming Ricky for being clumsy. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Ricky Neve on the day he died tragically matched that of James Watson, the teenage killer who had managed to evade justice for a long time. Despite her cruelty in raising her children, Ricky's mother seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her unforgiving actions, which drove her to seek her son's killer. Ricky's sisters were also determined to unravel the puzzling mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what really happened in the household where Ricky and his sisters were raised? And what occurred on the day of Ricky's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? In January of 1995, Ruth was suspected of murdering her own son during that very month. She faced charges of cruelty and neglect under the Children's Act and appeared at Peterborough Magistrates Court, accused of cruelty towards Ricky and one of her other children. In May of 1995, Ruth was charged with the murder of her son and offenses of cruelty to him and 2 of his sisters. Her trial began the following year, in October 1996, at the Northampton Crown Court. Prosecutors told the jury that Ricky and his siblings were treated with cruelty and neglect, backed by witness statements. The prosecution concluded that Ricky was killed in a sacrifice by his mother, based on her numerous death threats to him. Ruth admitted to charges of neglect and cruelty but denied any involvement in her son's murder. The case hinged on the testimony of a policeman who stated that he had not found the child's body during his search of the woods, where Ricky was eventually discovered on the night of his disappearance. The prosecution claimed the officer might have missed it in the dark. The jurors acquitted Ruth, convinced that she couldn't have moved Ricky's body since the police were with her at the said time. However, she was sentenced to 7 years in jail for the cruelty towards Ricky and his sisters, charges to which she had already confessed. Ruth was released in February, but the killer remained a mystery. In February 2008, she met Gary Rogers, who married her. By then, Ricky's murder had become a cold case, and the police had given up. Rogers promised Ruth that he would give her all the support she needed to reopen the case and try to find the killer. In 2013, with the help of Cambridgeshire Times editor John Elworthy, they worked tirelessly to campaign for the reopening of the case and eventually succeeded. Rogers secured the original files from Ruth's former solicitor, a collection of 13 boxes with 8 to 12 ring binders filled with papers, and diligently read through each one. They met Paul Fullwood, the head of the local major crime unit at the time, who listened to the evidence they had and saw the reviews that the police had done beforehand. He thought the original hypothesis of Ruth being the killer was fanciful at best, and the more he looked at it, the more he became convinced that they needed to investigate further. Mr. Fullwood organized a cold case investigation with a new team made up of staff not involved in the original investigation. With fresh perspective, determination, and what they deemed as a stroke of luck, new evidence that would help solve the crime was found in the forensic archives. The crucial evidence was a piece of sellotape used to collect fibers from Ricky's clothes. Advancements in DNA technology in recent years have played a crucial role in solving cold cases, bringing justice for victims whose killers were thought to have gotten away, and providing closure to family and friends. An unidentified DNA was found on Ricky's clothes, and forensic tests matched it to none other than James Watson. At the time of Ricky's death, Watson was only 13 and lived at Woodgate's Children's Home in Cambridgeshire, 20 miles away from Peterborough. He had moved there from foster care in March of 1994. On November 25, 1994, 3 days before Ricky's murder, Watson had asked his mother about a young child found dead in the woods. His mother, having no clue what he was talking about, brushed off the conversation, assuring him that nobody had heard of such a thing happening. Little did she know that he would be the one behind such an atrocity just 3 days later. Watson was questioned by the police after several witnesses claimed to have seen them together on that fateful day, but he vehemently denied it, stating he was nowhere near Ricky and that he only caught a glimpse of him. The mother also said nothing about the conversation they had, just some days prior about the made-up scenario of the young child in the woods that would materialize in less than a week, with an almost similar description to what had actually happened. The police did not further challenge him, perhaps due to ignorance or their preference for the idea of Ruth being the killer and not some disturbed teenager. They probably didn't know he was disturbed until later. Watson was, of course, searched for and arrested in April 2016 in connection with Ricky's murder. By then, he was already a serial offender with a criminal record that included stealing cars and an arson attack at a British transport police station back in February 2008. Questioned by the new investigation team about his DNA ending up on Ricky's clothes, Watson changed the story he had initially given to the police. He now said that he might have lifted Ricky to help him see over a fence. This statement started getting him into further trouble. The police tested his claim and found footage from 1994 showing the estate being redeveloped. They discovered that the fence was not built when Ricky Neve was still there, as it was constructed after he was already murdered. The investigators were therefore able to prove that Watson was not only a fantasist, but also a huge liar. However, this was still not enough to secure his conviction, so they started to pull other pieces of evidence together. It was not long until evidence was found that he had inappropriately touched a 5-year-old child when he was around 11 or 12, and his ex-girlfriend had also complained about him strangling her during sex. 2 teachers also revealed how he had become obsessed with Ricky's murder case, showing an unnatural level of interest in it, and even photocopying the front page of the Peterborough Evening Telegraph, which covered the case. More disturbing behavior had also been noted at the children's home where he lived, including him pleasing himself over pictures of young boys in underwear. He also kept a dead pheasant in his room, and it was claimed that he had on one occasion killed a bird and spread its wings in a sinister reconstruction of Ricky's murder. After being released on police bail, he left the UK 3 months later in a motorhome with another bail hostel resident. He traveled to Rotterdam, then France, and crossed the Pyrenees into Portugal. From France, he had reached out to his sister, Claire Perna, admitting that he was in serious trouble and that he had made a massive mistake. The next time he called, he reiterated that he was in deeper trouble and urgently needed to return to the UK. He had shamelessly posted pictures of himself on social media, enjoying the beaches, bragging about how he got out of the country. Seeing the pictures of Watson abroad, which were extensively covered in the media, angered Ricky's family. They knew that since he had escaped the country even after his passport had been taken, he was definitely guilty of the act. Watson was eventually rearrested near the British Embassy in Lisbon and extradited back to Britain. He was found guilty of murder by a majority of the Old Bailey jury. Previously, the court heard how Watson's sexual interest in younger boys was known to police, who had interviewed him over an allegation that he molested a 5-year-old back in 1993. The disturbing behavior was noted at Watson's children's home, and the prosecution claimed it was no coincidence that 3 days before the murder, Watson was the source of a bogus radio report about a 2-year-old boy being strangled. Immediately after Ricky's murder in identical circumstances, Watson obsessed over newspaper of the killing, copying front-page stories at school. The jurors heard that key evidence in the case against Watson included Ricky's last meal of Weetabix, taken in the morning, which fixed his time of death at around noon, when he was seen playing with Watson. It meant that Ricky was killed shortly after heading to the woods with Watson, where he used to play. Watson's legal team had accused Ricky's mother, but she denied any involvement. Ricky's muddy clock shoes also indicated his walk into the woods was a one-way trip and not a case of being murdered by the mother and the body being dragged into the forest, therefore ruling out that accusation. After a trial at London's Old Bailey that took place from January 18th to April 21st, 2022, James Watson, at the age of 41, was found guilty of Ricky Neve's murder. On June 24th, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years by Mrs. Justice McGowan. The judge considered Watson's age at the time of Ricky's death as a significant factor in determining the sentence. In June 2023, Watson was granted permission to appeal his conviction. His lawyer argued before the Court of Appeal that Watson was not able to get a fair trial because too much of the evidence from which the killer's DNA could have been recovered was lost or destroyed in the intervening years. This case could have been solved much earlier if the official police records of 6 reported sexual assaults on children in the Welland estate in the 3-year period before Ricky's murder had been thoroughly investigated. If the reports had been followed up, the allegation on his record of touching a 5-year-old could have been a crucial lead to the police in finding the perpetrator. These failures in the investigation add to the list of the many shortcomings in this case. The verdict was a triumph for Ricky's sisters, who had never thought they would see justice for their beloved brother. With the killer finally caught, the family found a sense of closure, allowing them to move forward with their lives while cherishing the memory of the little boy Ricky was back in 1994. Ricky Neve will forever be remembered as a loving and caring brother and a brave and kind-hearted boy. Despite facing challenges at a young age, he showed remarkable courage and love and always protected his sisters. He deserved a life brimming with joy, but tragically, he endured cruelty, neglect, and the ultimate horror of murder. If he had been given the love and affection he deserved, this heart-wrenching tragedy might never have occurred in the first place. On July 11, 1963, a fisherman found a decomposed body of a young boy in the water of the Keene County Reservoir in Oregon. The boy had been wrapped in a blanket. The technology was not there yet to identify the boy with DNA, so he went unidentified for a very long time. In 2009, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created a composite image to try and generate new leads. The University of North Texas Center for Human Identification also uploaded the boy's DNA profile to the Combined DNA Index system, but no matches were found. Recently, investigators turned to genetic genealogy. As most of you know by now, it is a process where an unknown suspect's DNA left at a crime scene can be identified, using his or her family members who voluntarily submitted their DNA samples to a public DNA database. This allowed investigators to create a much larger family tree compared with using codies. Genetic genealogy is not only great for catching criminals, but also identifying unknown victims. Parabon Nanolabs were asked to help identify the boy. Using genetic genealogy, they found a man who they believed was the sibling of the young boy. The man said he had a younger brother with disabilities, named Stevie Crawford, who lived in Oregon in the early 1960s. Stevie had mysteriously vanished from their family of little explanation. Investigators found Stephen Alexander Crawford, who was born on October 2, 1960. The man gave them his DNA sample. After some more testing, it was confirmed that the young boy is indeed Stevie Crawford. How he passed away is not known, but investigators have said his secretive burial and lack of family information is something they are investigating. On October 22, 2016, police were called out to a South Storage unit in Durham, North Carolina. The person told officers that they were busy cleaning out the unit after the owner passed away and found a plastic storage container with bones inside. After the remains were collected, they were sent to the medical examiner's office. It was then confirmed that it was human remains. It belonged to a female. DNA was extracted and eventually submitted into a national DNA database. No matches were made, however, and the person's identity remained a mystery. In 2018, investigators sent a skull to the FBI to perform facial reconstruction. A composite image was made after Jane Doe. The image was made public, but investigators got no viable leads and the case remained cold. In 2020, investigators made another effort. They sent a case to the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. They also asked Ophrem Lab in Texas to see about conducting more advanced forensic DNA testing. While working on a different case, investigators learned that a woman named Melissa Poitra, who was 28 years old in 2005, had been missing for many years after leaving North Dakota. They learned that she was known to frequent Durham area. Investigators contacted her family and obtained DNA samples. A company called DNA Solutions were then able to confirm that Melissa and Poitra was indeed the Jane Doe they were trying to identify. Investigators said that they do not know how she passed away, but it is believed that someone took her life. Investigators do not say if the person owned the storage is involved at all. Melissa's family raised nearly $10,000 on GoFundMe to give her a proper memorial. Anyone with information can call the Durham Police Department at its number, or they can leave an anonymous tip by calling Crime Stoppers. In April 1977, a husband and wife were looking for the pump in a septic tank on a farm owned in Toefield. Instead, they found a man's body in the tank and was wrapped in a yellow bedsheet and bound with nylon rope. The couple then drove to the nearest police station and told them what they had found. For the next few hours, the Mounties used old ice cream pails to scoop the liquid out of the tank and begin recovering the body. It was noted that the victim had been mutilated and shot twice. The body was too decomposed to be identified. It was believed that he had been in the septic tank for over a year. It was estimated that he was in his 20s and about 5 feet and 10 inches tall. He was wearing jeans, a blue Levi's shirt, gray work socks, and imitation wallaby shoes. Over the years, investigators interviewed many possible witnesses and dragged down thousands of leads, but got no closer to identifying the man. A forensic dentist saw that he had extensive dental work done, but was not able to identify him. They were able to tell, however, that he had a serious illness around the age of 5 and left its mark on his teeth and bones. He was given a few nicknames such as Septic Tank Sam, Sam Doe, and Toefield John Doe. The residents of Toefield at the time were horrified. Farmers checked their own septic tanks for bodies. It was believed the person responsible for taking his life was local because of where his body was found. Finally, on June 29, 2021, investigators announced that the remains were identified using genetic genealogy. Ophrem Incorporated, a private lab in Woodlands, Texas, was able to identify him as Gordon Edwin Sanderson. He was born in Manitoba on October 22, 1950. Gordon was put into foster care at the age of 9. He struggled with addictions and had various run-ins with police. In the 1970s, he was living in Edmonton. The last time he spoke to his family, he mentioned that he was going to visit his brother in Calgary. He survived by an older sister, whose DNA was used to confirm his identity, and a daughter. Investigators still do not know who took his life, but are still investigating it. "52-year-old Daniel Mason Woolley lived in Clayton, Idaho in 1980. It is an extremely small town with a population of just 7 people. At 10 p.m. on September 22, 1980, Daniel was drinking at a sports club bar. A fight broke out between Daniel and a man named Walter James Mason. Daniel saw that Walter was hitting his wife, so Daniel and 2 other men escorted Walter out of the bar, and a fight took place. Walter made it to his pickup truck and took out 2 pistols. He then shot Daniel once on the right side of his head, just above the ear. Walter, they managed to flee. Investigators were not able to find him. A wanted poster was put up, but did not lead anywhere. It would take an unbelievably long time for investigators to find Walter. In October 2019, they finally found him. He had been living under the alias Walter James Allison, was arrested and taken back to Idaho to face trial. In June of 2021, Walter passed away, won custody at the age of 85. It was revealed that Walter had lived the last 25 years in Rising Star, Texas. He lived with a woman named Beverly Meacham, who passed away a few months before he was arrested. Beverly's daughter did some research on Walter and found that he was wanted in Idaho. She told investigators, and it led to the arrest. Daniel's son, Brett, had just to say, After nearly 40 years of running free, the man who took my father's life passed away last night. I hope the devil has time for him. This has been a long chapter. 20-year-old Michelle Louise Wyatt lived in San Diego, California in 1980. She was attending Grossmont Community College and was a cashier at Safeway in Mission Hills. Michelle lived in a condo complex at Kerrigan Court in Santee, San Diego with her roommate. On October 9, 1980, her roommate made a startling discovery. Michelle's body was found on a living room floor. She had been assaulted and strangled using a telephone cord. Investigators made a timeline of events. Michelle's boyfriend left her condominium and locked the front door in the early morning on October 9th. Soon after he left, witnesses heard screaming coming from where Michelle lived, but nobody called 911. 2 separate DNA profiles were taken from Michelle's body. One belonged to a boyfriend and the other from an unknown man. Michelle's boyfriend was then eliminated as a suspect. Detectives interviewed numerous people but were unable to identify the unknown man, and the case went cold. In 2001, the unknown suspect's DNA profile was entered in a combined DNA index system. No matches could be made over. In September 2020, investigators made use of genetic genealogy to help identify the suspect. Finally, in August of 2021, it was announced that John Patrick Hogan is the man that took Michelle's life. He was 18 years old at the time of the crime. He was born in Arizona in 1961. In his 70s, he moved to San Diego and attended Santana High School. He lived less than a mile away from Michelle. John also had friends who lived in Michelle's complex. In 1979, he joined the Air Force. He was stationed in New Mexico and moved around between California, Idaho, and Arizona. He passed away from a heart attack on October 9, 2004 in Phoenix, Arizona. He was 42 years old. He took Michelle's life on October 9, 1980. So this meant that he passed away 24 years after Michelle to the day. Detectives do not believe that he is connected to other unsolved crimes in San Diego, but I have shared a case with agencies where he lived, specifically in his 70s and 80s. Michelle's parents are now in Verities. I was relieved when a detective came to tell them the news. Michelle's boyfriend was also present. He still often visits her parents. Michelle's mom, Louise Wyatt, had us to say, "I'm glad to find out that he is gone, but I'm missing something. What is the word I'm looking for? Closure. I don't have closure, and that is what I need. At least now I know this guy isn't out there anymore. But I would still like to get him," she said. 42-year-old Judy Nesbitt lived in Irvine, California in 1980 with her husband and 4 children. On November 26th, she left her house to go to Newport Beach. She was going to show her family's boat, named Felicitat to a man who she believed to be a potential buyer. When Judy did not make it back home, her husband got worried, so he went to the boat to see what was going on. He found her body in the bedroom of the boat. She had been shot. Her credit cards, checkbook, and money shed on her was stolen. Investigators found strands of hair on a boat, and it did belong to any of the family members. It was believed that a night stalker could be responsible for taking Judy's life. Witnesses soon came forward and said that they saw Judy with a Caucasian man. This made it less likely to be the night stalker as he was believed to be Hispanic. Eventually, the night stalker was discovered to be Richard Ramirez, and was confirmed had he had no involvement in what happened with Judy. Investigators released sketches of the man had seen with Judy just before she passed away. In 2002, investigators were able to create a DNA profile of the suspect from the forensic evidence they collected from the crime scene back in 1980. It was submitted to the combined DNA index system, but no matches could be made, unfortunately. In 2018, Green Lab, an independent company, was able to create a more detailed DNA profile. They were then able to make use of genetic genealogy to identify the suspect. On August 9, 2021, it was announced by the Newport Beach Police Department that Kenneth Alwyn Marks is the person who ended Judy's life. Frustratingly, he passed away in 1999. Not much is known about him. just that was 44 years old when he passed, and he was described as a loner. Judy's eldest son, Steve Nesbitt, had this to say: "Personally, I wish he was still alive. I would have loved to have had a knock on his door and have handcuffs on him." Judy's husband Fred passed away earlier this year, but he was told about the case being closely solved before passing at the age of 85. On June 1st, 2011, the Waller family's life took a turn. A woman named Jackie contacted her sister Cheryl, informing her that she was going to pick up her children from her exo's band Clay. Jackie planned to return home later that day. However, she never came back, nor did she make any further contact. Worried and unable to reach Jackie, Cheryl became increasingly anxious. By around 7 p.m., Cheryl decided to drive to the police station. Here, she made a startling statement. Cheryl claimed that Clay Waller had killed her sister. The police officers found this accusation shocking, since Jackie had only called a few hours earlier, and there hadn't been any immediate cause for concern or reason to believe she was in danger at that time. Despite the unusual nature of Cheryl's assertion, it eventually became apparent that her instincts were correct. Jackie was indeed entangled in a troubling situation. So what exactly happened to Jackie? And why was Cheryl so convinced her sister had been murdered by her ex-husband even before Jackie was declared missing? Jackie was known for being sweet, kind, and caring. When she met Clay, there was an instant connection between them. Clay had a speech impediment that had subjected him to ridicule by others. This made him feel awkward and uncomfortable in social situations. However, unlike others, Jackie didn't ridicule him. Instead, she defended him and ensured he wasn't hurt by people's unkind remarks. Jackie's nature was all about protecting the vulnerable, fighting injustice, and helping everyone around her. It wasn't long before their bond grew stronger and they got married. At the time of their marriage, both were about 30 years old and aspired to have a large family. They bought a small house in Sanguine View, Missouri, where Jackie began creating a family nest. She had a successful career. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said about Clay. His life consisted of numerous failures, and he struggled with holding down any job for long periods. As a result, Jackie became the primary breadwinner of the family. She always dreamed of having children, but faced challenges in conceiving naturally. Determined to become a mother, though, she underwent fertility treatments, commonly referred to as ECO. So when Jackie discovered she was pregnant, with triplets no less, her joy knew no bounds. The family included 2 girls, Abby and Addison, plus 1 boy, Maddox. It was incredibly challenging for the woman to care for 3 children at once. Nonetheless, she did not complain. She continued to shoulder all responsibilities by herself, without relying on her husband. He seemed uninterested in the children. At that time, Clay took a job with the sheriff's office to support the family while his wife cared for the children. However, he didn't stay long. He was fired after a year. Only Jackie's parents and sister provided assistance with the children, allowing her some respite. When Clay lost his job, Jackie took on work to support the entire family. Even after their children were born, Clay did not change his behavior and showed little interest in either his family or work. Occasionally, he engaged in part-time work that didn't bring in the expected income. Clay seemed comfortable living off his wife's hard work. She worked 40 hours a week and managed the household simultaneously. Jackie's career progressed rapidly. She soon secured a management position at an insurance company branch. This advancement further relaxed Clay's attitude toward financial responsibility. Instead of appreciating his wife's efforts, Clay mistreated her in various ways. He insulted her frequently, called her worthless, and demeaned her value by stating no one wanted her. His infidelities and abusive actions caused significant distress. Jackie's parents and sister were deeply troubled by Clay's behavior and urged her to divorce him. However, Jackie was reluctant to take such a drastic step at that time and tried to salvage their marriage. Every day brought diminishing hope that their relationship could be saved. Over the next few years, financial difficulties compounded their problems because Clay was not working while Jackie's salary could no longer cover all expenses for their large family. Mounting mortgage debts led to their house being foreclosed upon. The woman decided it was time to move in with sister, seizing upon the opportunity. Her husband then relocated to a friend's place. At this point, their children were a bit older. Jackie faced the tough yet necessary choice to file for divorce. She believed she and her kids deserved a better life. When Jackie brought this up with her husband, Clay seemed calm initially. However, he soon changed his stance and refused the divorce. His threats started subtly, but gradually escalated into direct threats against her life. He warned that divorcing him would be like signing a death warrant for herself and their children. These threats terrified Jackie, yet she remained resolute. Living under such conditions was no longer an option for her, so she sought ways to end her marriage with Clay. She turned to her family, sharing the troubling behaviors of her husband, and began keeping a diary to document his actions. Jackie also noticed that Clay was stalking her. For the sake of safety, she and her children moved in with her sister during this period. Her kids were only 5 years old and didn't understand the situation fully. Nonetheless, Jackie explained that their current living arrangement was crucial. Time passed, and things began to stabilize as the divorce process neared its conclusion. It appeared that Clay had come to terms with their separation and ceased his harassment towards Jackie. They even started forming new relationships on the side. Jackie allowed Clay visitation rights with their children, and disputes between them reduced significantly. On June 1st, 2011, Clay and Jackie agreed to meet at the attorney's office to finalize the last aspects of their divorce. On that day, their son Maddox was visiting his father, while Jackie's other children stayed with Cheryl, Jackie's sister. After the meeting at the attorney's office, Jackie planned to pick up Maddox from Clay's house before heading back to Cheryl's place. Leaving the office, Jackie telephoned her sister Cheryl to report that everything had gone smoothly and mentioned she was on her way to collect Maddox from Clay's residence before returning home. That conversation would be their last. Jackie gradually lost touch. As time passed, her sister became increasingly anxious and started calling Jackie, but there was no answer. She then tried calling Clay, but he didn't respond either. Cheryl began to suspect that Clay had done something to Jackie. She sent him a text message. "If I don't hear from Jackie in 5 minutes, I'm going to the police." Almost immediately, Clay called back asking what was wrong. Cheryl responded firmly, stating that she believed he knew exactly what was happening. Clay asserted he didn't know where Jackie was and mentioned he would instruct her to call Cheryl when he saw her. However, Cheryl wasn't convinced. She took her sister's children to their parents at a house and filed a police report personally. Despite initial skepticism about Clay's involvement in Jackie's disappearance, the detectives took her concerns seriously. They didn't make her wait for 24 hours before investigating further. Instead, they pried to contact Jackie's ex-husband for any leads on her whereabouts. When questioned, 41-year-old Clay informed them that he had lunch with Jackie. They subsequently went to the attorney's office to discuss some aspects of their divorce, and then drove together to his house for further discussions. He claimed that after chatting for a while, he left for the store. Upon his return, Jackie's car was gone. He assumed she had departed. Clay added that his son Maddox was in Illinois with his new girlfriend at the time and insisted Jackie was aware of it. According to him, Jackie wasn't there for her son, but merely to talk about other matters with Clay. However, Cheryl found his statements implausible and inconsistent with what she knew. Jackie made it known that her visit to Clay's house was solely for seeing her son. She had no intention of discussing anything else with him, especially given that she wouldn't have allowed her son to be far away with another woman. Noting these discrepancies, Cheryl managed to convince the investigators that Clay's account lacked credibility and suggested he might be concealing crucial information about Jackie's disappearance. In light of this new perspective provided by Cheryl, investigators were now treating the case more urgently, as both the missing person and her car remained unaccounted for. A comprehensive search was launched for Jackie a few hours after her disappearance. Investigators her Honda Pilot on an interstate highway with a flat tire, but there were no signs of an accident. The tire appeared punctured intentionally, making the scene look staged. The car was open and empty, with a few bloodstains on the back seat, but no other clues indicating her whereabouts. These disturbing details hinted at a possible attack and kidnapping. The search effort for Jackie was concentrated in the vicinity where her car was found. Numerous volunteers, including police officers, rescue squads with dogs, and family members, participated in the search. They came from various parts of the region, responding to requests from Jackie's relatives. Despite the unbearable heat, many were willing to help locate her. Jackie's family announced a reward of $3,500 for information about her whereabouts. Despite their efforts, including extensive searches and public appeals for assistance, the search yielded no results for several days. Police began to scrutinize Clay, Jackie's ex-husband, more closely. When they visited his house to speak with him again, he recounted the same story as before, but refused access to his home and car. He promptly hired a lawyer who asserted his rights. For days after Jackie's disappearance, Clay left her a voicemail with a distressed tone. "Hi, honey. It's Sunday. You went missing on Wednesday. Please call me if you get this message. I don't know where you are, and I miss you very much." Detectives later obtained a search warrant and returned to Clay's residence for a thorough inspection. During this inspection, they discovered blood-like stains in his vehicle. Forensic analysis revealed it was fish blood. Clay had deliberately coated the car with fish blood and recorded it on video as a test for forensic experts. In addition to examining the vehicle, investigators noted conspicuous details in Clay's house. A section of carpet had been removed from the floor, leaving an obvious mark. Tiny drops of blood were also found on the walls of the hallway leading to the basement. These findings raised further questions about Clay's involvement and intentions regarding Jackie's disappearance. Traces of furniture rearrangement were evident, signaling that something unusual was happening in the house. Forensics examined under the floorboards and discovered a bloody carpet. Blood samples from the house and the carpet were sent to the laboratory for further examination. Detectives tracked the missing woman's last known movements to 1:10 a.m. She was observed at a drugstore with her ex-husband. The pair appeared composed and normal. Approximately 2 hours later, few hours later with his son and new girlfriend at a toy store. Subsequently, they visited a car wash in their pickup truck, which had a suspicious trash can inside. By then, Clay had changed clothes and meticulously washed both the car and the boat. This increased suspicion around him, establishing him as the prime suspect. Investigators released photos of Clay's pickup truck and boat, requesting eyewitnesses who may have seen them. A young couple reported seeing Clay near Devil's Island on the Mississippi River in response to this request. Detectives confirmed this information through an analysis of Clay's cell phone billing records, prompting them to focus search efforts in that area. Despite numerous searches over the large terrain, nothing surfaced directly linking to the missing woman. The forensic results soon arrived, indicating that the drops of blood found in Clay's house indeed belonged to Jackie. The police then operated under the assumption that Jackie was deceased. Detectives called Clay in for questioning and attempted to procure a confession from him regarding Jackie's murder. However, Clay denied all, stating that the bloodstains were remnants of an old domestic incident in his kitchen. Without physical remains or definitive proof of death, investigators lacked grounds to arrest or charge him. Despite releasing him from custody, authorities kept Clay under close surveillance and continued their investigation. Being an ex-deputy sheriff himself, Clay knew they were monitoring him closely and engaged in deceptive maneuvers to elude detection, effectively playing cat and mouse with law enforcement officials. He'd go to deserted vacant lots to mislead the investigation while the entire neighborhood stood by and participated in the search for the missing mother of 3. Clay continued to bully and taunt them. He would drive past the search party or Jackie's family, insult them, give them the middle finger, and shout that they were wasting their time and wouldn't find anything. His defiant behavior raised more suspicions and questions. Meanwhile, the missing woman's sister Cheryl fought in court for custody of the triplets. She feared the children would go to a father who was a danger. His erratic behavior backfired on him, and Cheryl got custody. This enraged him, and he began threatening his ex-wife's sister with violence, including writing about it on social media. The woman recorded these threats and contacted police. Detectives seized the opportunity and arrested Clay nearly 5 months after Jackie's disappearance. He was charged with threats to life which he accepted, but claimed he wrote out of anger and despair at losing custody of his beloved children. Clay insisted he didn't plan anything bad against Cheryl. He viewed himself as a victim in this situation. While investigating this incident with his sister, police found out he had other charges pending against him, stealing $50,000 from a previous employer, as well as stalking a man. Detectives pressed his former co-worker, hoping Clay would confess to killing his ex-wife and lead them to her body, but it was futile. Clayton continued to deny all charges regarding Jackie's disappearance. Instead of confessing to the crime, he started claiming confidently that he knew who was behind his ex-wife's death, a man named Harry. But detectives had already checked this lead thoroughly. Harry had an ironclad alibi that eliminated him from suspicion. All evidence pointed only to Clay, yet he kept denying it. He ended up going to prison for 5 years for threatening Cheryl. While the police locked him up in jail, they continued to investigate Jackie's disappearance. The search for the missing woman continued on Devil's Island, but never yielded any results. Eventually, about 2 years after Jackie's disappearance, the cops gathered a lot of circumstantial evidence, video camera footage, blood in his house, and more. They decided to charge Clay with his ex-wife's murder, even without her body. It was a risky and desperate move because if they lost, the prosecutor's office would not be able to charge him a second time. However, the prosecutor was determined. After consulting with his accomplices, Clay concluded that it would be best for them to make a deal with the prosecution to reduce the sentence. To do so, the defendant offered to plead guilty to the murder and provide the location of the body. Jackie's family agreed to this deal because it was important to give her a decent burial. Clay led police officers to his ex-wife's body. It was in a secluded spot on a remote sandbar on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River. At first, he couldn't remember exactly which tree he had buried her under, but then admitted that he had placed a bag of fertilizer on top of her body. One of the policemen, who was an active gardener, explained that large quantities of fertilizer killed trees. They looked around and found 3 dead trees that were of interest to them. They excavated there, and under one of the trees, they did find Jackie's body wearing the same clothes she had last been seen in. The woman was identified from dental records as Jackie Waller. Finally, Jackie's loved ones recognized that she was definitely dead and found her body. Then they were able to commit her to the ground. The woman's funeral was held on her parents' golden wedding day. Cheryl told their children that their mom was gone, and she had been killed by their father. This event was a great shock to the children because they lost both their mother and father at once. The children developed a deep aversion to Clay and refused to communicate with him henceforth. As part of the agreement, Clay had to officially confess to the murder of his ex-wife and provide specific details. He explained that the initial thoughts of murder began to surface about a year before the tragic event when Jackie announced their separation. Despite this, he tried to suppress those dark thoughts as Jackie was the mother of his children. However, he couldn't bear the idea of her taking his children away. He warned Jackie that such actions would have dire consequences for her. But she didn't heed his warning, which he considered her fault. The night prior to the murder, Clay traveled to a secluded area on Devil's Island to dig a grave for Jackie. According to him, their divorce proceedings were generally progressing smoothly. On that particular day, after a visit to their lawyer, they had a conversation in which she suggested they engage in intimacy one last time. They then went back to his home where they talked in the kitchen. While looking for a snack in the refrigerator, Clay accidentally raised his head, hitting Jackie and causing her nose to bleed. This incident angered her. She stormed out into the hallway, where she smeared blood on the walls and started yelling at him that he would never see his children again. At this point, Clay lost control and attacked her. He hit her in the face with his hand and then strangled her. Subsequently, he took Jackie's body out in a dumpster and buried it in the pre-dug grave. Afterward, he meticulously cleaned out both the car and house, took a shower, changed clothes as if nothing happened, and then went on to meet his new girlfriend and son at a toy store. Throughout this process, Clay claimed that everything was driven by impulse and emotion. He did not originally intend to kill Jackie. This contradicted his earlier statement, claiming he had dug the grave the day before. However, if Clay did not plan to kill the woman, why would he have dug the grave beforehand? It appeared to be premeditated murder. The medical examiner found multiple skull fractures on the deceased, indicating blunt force rather than a simple beating with fists. No one believed his story. Clay, who showed no remorse for killing his ex-wife, felt jubilant at receiving only 20 years in prison for second-degree murder with the possibility of early release. The prosecutor, however, had another strategy. Clay's testimony about digging the grave buried him further. He had dug the hole in Illinois while the murder occurred in Missouri. These actions fell under the federal law against domestic violence across state lines, and their violation allowed an additional 35 years to be added to his sentence. Clay Waller will be eligible for parole after serving 85% of his 55-year sentence. It turned out that Clay was unaware of such a law and did not foresee the consequences of his confession. Yet his atrocities continued. Demonstrating further callousness, he wrote a book detailing Jackie's murder to profit from the tragedy. Cheryl, Jackie's sister, along with her husband, continues to raise Jackie's children with support from their elderly parents. The children have grown up remembering their mother as an exceptional person who remains forever in their hearts. They still harbor anger toward their father and deeply miss their mom. "18-year-old Caitlyn Arquette lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1989. She graduated from high school on June 14th. Caitlyn had been accepted to the University of New Mexico. Her aspirations were to attain medical school one day. Directly after graduation, she moved into an apartment with her boyfriend, Zhang Nyopuwen. He was 8 years older than her, but she told her parents that he was only 4 years older, so they would not worry. Zhang took part in a lot of criminal activities and belonged to a Vietnamese gang. 6 weeks after moving in together, Caitlyn told her mom, Lois Duncan, that she and Zhang had been having problems and they were constantly arguing. Caitlyn planned to break up with him. On July 16th, she was heading to her mom's house at 11 p.m. in her car. She reached an intersection. Another car then pulled up next to her, and one of the passengers shot her twice in the head. It was just before midnight. Had Caitlyn's family learned that she was in the emergency room, they rightfully believed that she had been in a car accident. It was only when they arrived at the hospital that they were told that she had been shot. Investigators went to her apartment to see what they could find. They found Zhang. He claimed to be unaware of the shooting and said he was out with friends all night. Sadly, Caitlyn passed away from injuries 24 hours later. In 1990, investigators announced Caitlyn had been a victim of a random act of violence. Her family did not believe this was the case. Her family believed Caitlyn knew too much about Zhang's criminal activities, and the gang members were scared that she would go to the police. Her family also discovered that phone calls were made from Caitlyn's apartment at virtually the same time her life was taken. This made it seem that Zhang was lying when he said he was out of friends that evening. Investigators refused to believe that Zhang or his gang was involved, and are not investigated. Also in 1990, an informant led investigators to Robert Garcia. He was interrogated for 2 hours. Robert said that at the evening he was in a car with Dennis Martinez, Juvenal Escobedo, and Miguel Garcia. He also said that Miguel Garcia was the one that shot Caitlyn. All of the men were arrested, but the case soon fell apart when it was discovered that Robert Garcia was in prison that night. Caitlyn's family then decided to hire a private investigator. He found that a man named Paul Apodaca was found standing next to Caitlyn's car when police arrived on the scene. He had an extensive criminal history, but was somehow never questioned during the initial investigation. In July of 2021, when he was questioned, he confessed. He also confessed to taking the lives of 2 other women. I will make a separate video on other women. Caitlyn's family is relieved, but critical of the Albuquerque police for never questioning Apodaca and letting him walk away from the crime scene. In August of 1992, a swimmer found the body of a baby in a Catawba River in York County, South Carolina. The baby was female and found wrapped in a bedsheet inside a plastic grocery bag. The child had been stabbed numerous times. An autopsy revealed had the baby passed away due to suffocation, not drowning or the stabbings. Investigators were unable to identify the baby, so she was named Baby Angel. It was determined as she was only a few hours old when her life was taken. Investigators found DNA on the bedsheet and collected it so it could be used later. They did not get any leads, so the case went cold. In October 2020, detectives re-examined the case and submitted the DNA from the bedsheet to the York County Forensic Lab for testing. The results came back and showed that the DNA belonged to 48-year-old Stacey Michelle Costner-Rabin. She is the mom of Baby Angel. In August of 2021, Stacey was arrested at her home in Rock Hill, South Carolina. She was not very happy, as you can see. She did not deny that the baby was hers. Investigators have not been able to find the child's father and aren't certain that he is still alive. York County Sheriff Kevin Dawson had us to say, "I am very thankful for the hard work of our detectives and DNA analysts. Their dedication has led to the closure of a case that has haunted our community for years." 17-year-old Lesie McCrae lived in Jacksonville, Florida in 1985. She was a student at the University of North Florida and aspired to be a model. At 2 in the morning on Christmas Eve, Lesie and her boyfriend was in her apartment sleeping. Her boyfriend woke up to a man standing next to the bed. He had a knife. The man then tied Lesie and her boyfriend up. The boyfriend watched in panic as Lesie was then dragged away by an unknown man. He managed to free himself and called the police. They immediately started searching the area. Sadly, her body was found a few hours later along the side of a road. She had severe injuries to her head and chest. Investigators from a Jacksonville sheriff's office then collected evidence from the crime scene. This included DNA evidence that could be used later to help identify the unknown man. Investigators asked the public for anyone to come forward with useful information. They also had interviews with criminals in the area who have committed similar crimes. It led nowhere and the case went cold. A DNA profile for the suspect was created and submitted to Cody's, but no matches could be made. In 2019, Leslie's family reached out to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office to look into the case again, so they did. Recently, in April of 2020, investigators again submitted the DNA profile and found that it matched the prisoner in a Michigan corrections database. The prisoner is 59-year-old David Nelson Austin, is serving a life sentence for unrelated crimes. Investigators found that he did live in Jacksonville at the time of the crime. After some more DNA testing, it was confirmed that he is responsible. A press conference was held on August 20th, 2021, where it was announced that David has been indicted. Investigators are now working on getting David extradited from Michigan to Florida to face the charges against him. According to psychologists, most often teenagers commit offenses for 3 reasons: the desire to assert themselves and gain authority among their peers, alcohol addiction or addiction to illegal drugs, but most importantly, a sense of impunity. Even for the most serious crimes, minors often receive minimal punishment because their young age is taken into account. In our story today, a schoolgirl named McKenzie Sharilla became the perpetrator of a terrible tragedy that took 2 lives at once. However, the girl herself did not feel remorse for her crime and at the trial stated that she could do almost anything while staying alive, but she does not consider herself cool. McKenzie repeatedly changed her testimony, writing off everything on a lapse in memory and apparently, until the last moment was confident that she would get away with it. But the verdict of the judge literally dumbfounded the young criminal and her mother so desperately defending her daughter. But let's get to the bottom of this. Who is McKenzie Sharilla? McKenzie Sharilla was born in August 2004 in the quiet town of Strongsville, Ohio, and was the 3rd child in the family. Her parents, John Sharilla and Madeline Stevens, tried to bring up their heirs in love and care to give them a good education and encourage all endeavors. The youngest daughter was a family favorite. She was forgiven many pranks from childhood, and even serious misdemeanors often got away with it. McKenzie grew up capricious, demanding, and selfish girl. She was used to the fact that parents always do as she requires and was also confident in her own impunity no matter what she did. Classmates and teachers of the girl noted that in childhood she was quite a nice and open child. But with age, her character and behavior began to deteriorate. The girl threw real tantrums. If something went wrong, she easily lost her temper, behaved impudently and impatiently, swore, and could even get into a fight. McKenzie did not consider anyone's opinion but her own. Her words should always be the last, and she put her own interests above all else. In adolescence, the character of the girl became simply unbearable, but her parents did not see anything terrible in this, believing that her daughter has a transitional age and she should be treated with understanding and patience. However, bad character was far from the worst of all the troubles. In high school, McKenzie was addicted to alcohol as well as sometimes dabbled in illegal drugs, but she got away with it. Often, the girl's actions were reckless and carried a direct threat not only to her, but also to the people around her. Parents still did not notice or simply did not want to notice the obvious problem. Like many of her peers, McKenzie was a big fan of social media and literally never let her smartphone out of her hands. She often posted provocative pictures of herself smoking or drinking alcohol on her account, and she left equally provocative comments on them. McKenzie's friends were just like her. Together, they vandalized, organized pogroms, fights, sometimes stole, and several times came to the attention of the police. However, the young people were treated only with warnings and educational talks, which strengthened their belief in their own impunity. Dominique Rousseau, a young man named Dominic Rousseau, was also a native of Strongsville. He was born in September 2001 and was the fourth of 7 children to his parents, Frank and Christine Rousseau. The boy was raised with 3 brothers and 3 sisters with whom he was always very close. Dominic studied well in school, from childhood years actively engaged in sports and tried to lead a healthy lifestyle. Despite the fact that he grew up in a large family, neither he himself nor any of his brothers or sisters was not deprived of parental love, attention, and care. Spouses Frank and Christine were moderately strict with their children, but at the same time promoted their all-round development. Dominic always had a lot of friends. He was used to being in the center of attention and became the soul of any company. The young man had a bright and quite attractive appearance, was trim and interesting, so he also had a lot of admirers from a young age. However, he himself tried to avoid fleeting romances, emphasizing serious and promising relationships. After graduating from high school, Rousseau became a student at a local university, choosing the specialization producer of performing arts. He dreamed of linking his life with music and one day becoming a famous music producer. In addition, the talented and versatile Dominic wrote and performed songs himself. By the age of 20, the guy already had his own small business. He bought a car and rented a separate apartment in a good neighborhood. At the same time, he continued to play sports and was considered one of the best students at the university. First love. Dominic and McKenzie met for the first time when the girls studied in the graduating class. It happened at one of the parties in the company of mutual friends, and this accidental meeting became fatal for both of them. Young people were complete opposites of each other, and opposites are known to attract. A handsome, curly-haired young man, well-versed in music, immediately attracted McKenzie's attention. He was radically different from the guys she usually socialized with. He was educated, well-mannered, interesting, and could easily hold a conversation on any topic. McKenzie herself had a striking appearance and slim figure, dressed well, and knew how to make the right impression. She turned on all her charm to draw the attention of the guys she liked, and she managed to achieve the desired rather quickly. In the fall of 2021, the couple began dating, and almost immediately, each of them introduced the chosen one to their parents. But if McKenzie's parents were delighted with her choice and considered Dominic a brilliant couple for their daughter, the parents of the Dye had mixed feelings about his passport. On the one hand, the girl looked sweet, innocent, and tried to make a good impression on them. But on the other hand, something in her immediately alerted Frank and Christine Rousseau. Friends and family members of Cheryl were sure that McKenzie, for the first time in her life, really fell in love and sincerely hoped that the relationship with the chosen one will positively affect her character and behavior. Then no one could not even guess what tragedy would end this youthful romance. The couple began to appear everywhere together, holding hands and openly demonstrating their tender feelings for each other. So soon, the whole small town knew about the relationship. Those who knew McKenzie well sincerely felt sorry for her boyfriend, but most just happy for them. What was wrong with her? Soon, Dominic began to notice oddities in his girlfriend's behavior, her defiant antics and desire to make everyone around her do only what she wants. At first, he did not focus too much attention on it, writing off everything on the young age and the desire to attract attention. The young people made plans for their future together and even planned to get married as soon as McKenzie turned 18. They also planned to leave their native provincial town and together go to conquer a major metropolis, ideally New York. There before, Dominic would open a lot of opportunities to build a brilliant career in the music industry and fully reveal his talent. But as time went on, McKenzie's behavior became more and more alarming and sometimes even frightened the guy. She demanded from her boyfriend that he did only what she wanted. And if he did not agree with her in something, she made scandals, threw tantrums, and behaved like a little capricious child. At first, Dominic tried to translate everything into a joke, but soon realized that this is the true face of his chosen one. In public, she was still trying to hold on, but being alone with her boyfriend spewed on him the whole storm of his emotions and sometimes even pounced on him with fists. McKenzie's behavior became more and more aggressive, and at some point, the young man decided that he had enough. He suggested that she take a pause in the relationship and sort out her feelings. But upon hearing this, McKenzie had a public showdown in front of their mutual friends. She screamed, threatened Dominic that she would kill him if he left her, threatened to burn down his house and wreck his car. But by doing so, she only made him feel more confident that he was doing the right thing by ending this toxic and unrewarding relationship, obsessive stalking. McKenzie had no intention of letting her boyfriend go, and at first, she acted as if nothing had happened. She continued to called him to various parties and other events, as well as exhibited in social networks of their joint photos, accompanying them with posts with declarations of love. When Dominic firmly told her that everything is over between them, she literally went mad with anger and rage. McKenzie went to his house almost daily and shouted all sorts of nasty things, insults, and threats under his windows. She called him from different numbers, left messages on his answering machine, wrote on social media, and emailed him. McKenzie then swore in love and offered to try to start all over again, then again began to insult and threats. Russo was confused. He simply did not know how to react to such behavior because he had never encountered such behavior. He tried talking, tried to ignore the former lover, and a couple of times even recorded her threatening tantrums on his phone. It got to the point that Sharilla, seeing the ex-boyfriend on the street or in another public place, began to scream and insult him in front of passers-by. She turned Dominic's life into a real nightmare, but he still hoped that a little more time would pass and she would leave him alone, switching to someone else. One day, in front of witnesses, McKenzie declared that it was easier for her to kill Dominic than to let him go. McKenzie said that if he didn't come back to her, no one would have him and she would take care of it. The young man did not take these words seriously, although those around him realized that McKenzie was not joking. Among the most frequent threats from the mouth of the schoolgirl were promises to hit and run over the guy with a car, as well as to put him in the car and drive off a cliff or stop on the railroad in front of a train rushing at them. Each option sounded terrifying, and each of them McKenzie described in detail as if she had planned it all out long ago and was just waiting for the right moment. An unexpected reconciliation. When McKenzie realized that threats and insults would not help her to get Dominic back, but only distanced him, she decided to change her tactics. McKenzie became sweet and charming again, stopped pressuring and harassing her ex-boyfriend, and instead tried her best to pretend that she realized her mistakes and wanted to change for the better. She talked about the upcoming enrollment, asked to help her choose a university, and also claimed that she had gotten smart, and most of all was now concerned about the final exams. Such changes pleasantly surprised Dominic. He, in spite of everything, still had tender feelings for the former girlfriend and decided out of kindness to help her with university enrollment. Therefore, they again began to see each other and communicate. Gradually, the couple became close again. Dominic began to invite McKenzie on dates, sought to spend all his free time with her, and believed that she had changed, matured, became more serious and responsible. He did not notice how he fell in love with her again, and all the former offenses remained somewhere in the past. However, this time, the young people were in no hurry to announce to all friends and acquaintances about their reunion. Their meetings were more like secret dates where they just enjoyed each other's company, avoiding the close attention of others. When Dominic's own brother Angelo learned about what was happening, he suggested that nothing good would come of it. But the young man in love did not heed his words. A devious plan. While Dominic naively rejoiced at being reunited with his girlfriend and the changes he thought had happened to her, McKenzie herself hatched a terrifying plan of reprisal against the young man. She was so fascinated by the idea of a car and a spectacular car crash that she began to work out the scenario in detail. In her free time, she spent hours driving around the city, choosing a place suitable for the realization of her plan. However, there were no high and steep cliffs nearby, and going out on the tracks while waiting for a train seemed to her an unreliable idea. One day, Sharilla drove into a nearby industrial area, a fairly secluded place with no cameras on the way and very few cars in the area. The schoolgirl's attention was drawn to a huge brick wall, and her second imagination immediately conjured up a new, no less horrible plan. She decided that if she accelerated to the maximum possible speed and crashed into the wall, it would be no less spectacular than falling off a cliff into an abyss. It should be noted that initially McKenzie planned to die together with her lover so that their story was retold by all the inhabitants of the city. She even told her best friend about it, but her friend simply did not believe in the seriousness of her intentions because McKenzie had visited such delusional ideas before, but everything was limited to empty conversations. A terrible realization of the plan and an accidental victim. At the July 2022, just a week before her coming of age, McKenzie suggested to Dominic that they go to an upcoming party hosted by their mutual friends. It would be a good opportunity to have fun, to unwind, and to let everyone know that they were back together and loved each other dearly. The young man readily agreed. He still didn't feel threatened by McKenzie and believed in the sincerity of her feelings and intentions. The event was scheduled for Saturday, July 30th. Dominique and McKenzie appeared in the middle of the party, holding hands, which immediately attracted the attention of those present. They looked happy, smiled, and openly showed affectionate feelings for each other. Friends were sincerely pleased with their reunion and noted that they are a very beautiful and harmonious couple. All evening and all night, the young people had fun, willingly photographed and without shyness, kissed in front of everyone. But no one even guessed what a terrible tragedy would end this party. The couple drank a little, however, like everyone else at the event. But McKenzie, secretly from everyone, took a dose of illegal drugs, so to speak, for courage, so as not to change his mind, and at the last moment did not hit the brakes. In the morning, Russo and Sharilla said goodbye to everyone and headed for the car. But then a friend of the guy, Davian Flanagan, followed them and asked them to give him a ride home. McKenzie tried to object, saying they had plans of their own, but Dominic saw no problem with giving his friend a ride. Not wanting to fight, arouse suspicion, or change plans, McKenzie agreed, signing Davian's death warrant. Despite her lover's objections, McKenzie got behind the wheel of the car. Her boyfriend sat next to her in the passenger seat, and her friend sat behind him. The car started and slowly pulled away from the party venue, heading out on its most recent trip. On the main street, McKenzie drove quietly, keeping to the speed limit and trying not to draw attention to herself. At a stoplight, she stopped though the road was empty. McKenzie once again considered her plan while her passengers dozed off. She later claimed that she wanted to die in the accident, but the perpetrator was obviously lying because she had fastened her seatbelt during the last stop while her passengers remained unbuckled. When the light turned green, she drove off, quickly picking up speed, and then took a sharp turn onto a poorly lit secondary road leading into an industrial area. Obviously, the guys didn't immediately realize what was going on, if at all. It was as if the devil himself had possessed the driver. The car accelerated to top speed, but McKenzie continued to press hard on the gas pedal, steering the car into a blank brick wall. A bystander and a miraculous rescue. There wasn't a soul in the industrial area early Sunday morning, so no one saw the accident or rushed to help. Only one woman who lived on the outskirts, not far from the scene of the accident, heard the bang and was not too lazy to go outside to see what was the matter. She saw smoke, and when she got closer, she realized that there had been a car crash, after which she ran back inside to call emergency services. Medics arrived at the scene about half an hour after the accident, but the two guys in the car could not be helped. They died on the spot. The girl behind the wheel was alive. She was saved by her seatbelt and airbags. McKenzie was unconscious, and her legs were trapped in the mangled car. But she was breathing, and her pulse was clearly palpable, giving hope that she would survive. She opened her eyes several times during the process of being released from the car, but was obviously unaware of what was going on around her. McKenzie was immediately sent to the hospital where she was diagnosed with a number of fractures and internal organ damage. Blood tests showed that she was under the influence of alcohol and drugs. However, according to the doctor, perhaps that is what prevented her from dying from painful shock while help was on the way. Investigation, leads, and confession. Initially, the police, having received the results of McKenzie's tests, assumed that she, being under the influence of illegal substances, simply did not realize what she was doing and perhaps tried to drive through the wall or did not see any obstacles in her way. In favor of this version was the lack of braking distance. It was not possible to talk to Sharilla herself because she was unconscious in the intensive care unit after a complex operation. However, she soon came to her senses and, realizing what she had done, began to sob and pour out her soul to the doctor on duty. She admitted that she purposely drove into the wall at a great speed because she wanted to kill her boyfriend and originally planned to die with him. McKenzie also added that Davion was an accidental victim due to his own obsession because he asked to go with them. The doctor did not take the patient's rambling story seriously, deciding that it was a delusional state resulting from anesthesia and painkillers as well as guilt over the death of a loved one. And when the police were allowed to talk to the recovering McKenzie, she suddenly changed her testimony completely. Now McKenzie claimed that she remembered almost nothing about the events of that night because she took alcohol and illegal substances. According to the girl, she had a lapse in memory after she got behind the wheel. And how Davion was in the car, she has no idea. However, the facts were to the contrary. The surveillance cameras were able to track the first part of the route the car had taken, and the footage clearly showed that McKenzie was driving slowly and according to the rules until she suddenly turned onto a road leading to an industrial zone. Moreover, it turned out that McKenzie had driven the entire route both ways several days earlier, and her car had been seen there at various times by at least a dozen witnesses back to normal. After being discharged from the hospital, McKenzie recovered quickly enough and tried to get back to her old, carefree life. She had no remorse and was confident that she could get away with it. McKenzie was once again active on social media, meeting with friends and making plans for the future. In September, she decided to go to a concert of her favorite band playing in a neighboring city. At that time, the bones of her legs had not yet fully fused, but this did not stop her, and she appeared on the concert stage in a wheelchair. At the same time, she wore bright makeup, dressed provocatively, took selfies with friends, and posted them on her account. In October, when Sharilla was on her feet, she went to a Halloween celebration dressed up in a pre-made costume. McKenzie lived life to the fullest and even made new acquaintances. But on November 4th, 2022, she was taken into custody. Trial and sentencing. It took the investigation just over 3 months to gather the necessary evidence and proof to bring the case to trial. McKenzie was charged with premeditated aggravated double murder and possession, and use of a controlled substance that was found in her pocket and detected in her blood. The defendant changed her testimony several times, first citing a lapse in memory, and then when her friend testified in court as a witness to whom she revealed her plan, McKenzie changed tactics, saying that she wanted to die with her lover. But even here, there were immediately discovered inconsistencies because she had previously fastened herself with a seatbelt. On August 21st, 2023, Sharilla was found guilty of all charges. However, an important nuance was taken into account. Namely, at the time of the crime, she was not yet 18 years old. It was 5 days before her majority, so she was tried as a minor. Under state law, she was entitled to at least 2 consecutive sentences of 15 years for each murder without parole. But because of her young age, she was allowed to serve the 2 sentences concurrently, meaning she would be eligible for parole in 15 years. By then, McKenzie would be 33 years old. Both sides were unhappy with the court's decision. Family members of the deceased young people said they would seek a review of the case in order to increase the punishment, and parents and McKenzie's lawyer, on the contrary, considered the sentence too harsh and filed an appeal. However, the judge left the sentence unchanged, noting that he did not believe that Sharilla would leave prison after 15 years. The defendant herself, in his opinion, did not repent for the evil she had committed, behaved arrogantly and even insolently towards the court. But now she will have enough time to seriously consider her heinous act. Jennifer Renee Odom was a 12-year-old girl living in the small community of St. Joseph, Florida. On February 19, 1993, Jennifer got off of her school bus at the intersection of Jessamine and Jim Denny Roads and started the 200-yard walk to her house. Jennifer's younger sister, Jessica, arrived home on a separate school bus but couldn't get into the house. Thinking her sister was playing a trick on her, as they often did, she walked down the road to their grandmother's house to get a key. When she returned and finally made it in the house, Jennifer was nowhere to be found. She then called her parents at work and informed them that Jennifer was not home. Worried, they rushed home and began calling friends to see if anyone had seen her. Hearing that she had possibly been last seen walking toward home, they immediately notified authorities of their daughter's disappearance. Friends on the school bus later reported seeing an older, faded blue pickup truck stopped on the side of the road nearby and stated that the truck began slowly creeping in the same direction that Jennifer was walking. After a massive search, a couple searching an abandoned orange grove in southeast Hernando County found Jennifer's body 10 miles from her home. It would later be released that her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and that she had been sexually assaulted. Her clothes were missing, as were her backpack, jacket, and clarinet case. On January 5, 1995, a couple looking for scrap metal in Hernando County found a book bag and clarinet case in a rural area. Both matched the description of the items that Jennifer had been carrying at the time of her disappearance and were thought to possibly be hers. When the couple opened the bag, they saw a textbook with her name inside. Police would later confirm the fingerprints found on the items matched those of Jennifer's. These items were found 30 miles from her home and 18 miles from where her body had been located almost 2 years earlier. Convicted rapist and kidnapper Jeffrey Norman Crum Sr. has since been named a person of interest in Jennifer's death. DNA testing connected Jeffrey to a similar crime that occurred in January 1992 in nearby Pasco County. In April 2017, he was arrested and charged in that case. Authorities noted similarities between the 1992 case and Jennifer's murder. New testing is currently being done on evidence from Jennifer's case. However, Jeffrey has not yet been charged in her death, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Judy McFarland was last seen on January 13, 1992, walking home after leaving a Bible study. The pastor at the church stated he saw Judy standing outside next to some flowers. He said it started to rain and he stopped and asked if she needed a ride home, but she declined. This was the last time Judy was seen alive, and her sister would report her missing a few days later. Over 6 months later, her body was found in a retention pond in Gainesville, Florida. A law and service was at the site cutting the grass when they found her behind a barbed wire chain link fence. Strangely, this wasn't the first time the grass had been cut since her disappearance, and crews never reported seeing her or anything else out of the ordinary. Also, the area where she was found was behind a locked gate, and the Florida Department of Transportation were the only ones with a key. The retention pond was located in an area off Northeast 29th Avenue and North Main Street, less than a mile from the church where she was last seen. At the time of her disappearance, she was living in a mobile home 3/4 of a mile from where she was found. One possible theory was she was put in the sewer system and ended up in the retention pond, but there is no solid evidence to prove this. Also, the medical examiner was never able to determine her cause of death. because Judy's body was sitting in the water for too long. Possible suspects include Judy's estranged husband, Jim McFarlane, who had been previously convicted of smuggling drugs out of Canada. However, he was deported back to Canada before her disappearance, and they could never place him at the scene of the crime. Another suspect was Robert Norris, who had previously dated Judy's younger sister. Judy and Robert had gotten into a violent argument one night in 1990. The argument was so bad that Judy called the police and had Robert arrested. He was subsequently charged with multiple felonies and sentenced to prison. Suspiciously, he was released on Monday and Judy went missing on Monday night. However, Robert was never charged in the connection with Judy's death, and he died in 2010 before the case was reopened. As of today, no one has been charged in her case and it remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.